These 7 players have insane money milestones that we can exploit in fantasy football to give us an edge over everybody else in our championship round start-sit decisions. I'll start with giving you a quick breakdown of these money milestones, what they are and why they're so important to week 17 specifically, and then I'll go into my list of the top 7 players that are positively affected by these things and finish out the video with my number 1 quarterback start that we need to be putting in our starting lineups regardless of what size your league is. Nobody is giving him the respect he deserves this week. Put him in your starting lineup, so make sure to stick around at the end of the video for that. But I will not waste your time. The first thing, what are these money incentives and why are they important to fantasy football? So when a player signs a contract, part of their agreed upon deal is these incentives, and there's 2 main types. The first one is performance based and team based. As you can imagine, the team based are more like making the playoffs or getting to a certain number of wins. We're not going to focus on those in these videos because they don't necessarily change the outcome of specific fantasy players and specific stats. So when we look at individual performance incentives, they're typically for touchdown totals and yard totals. They fall into 2 categories, one being likely and the other being not as likely to be earned. For example, Derrick Henry had 12 touchdowns last year, so getting 12 touchdowns again this year would fall under the likely to be earned category and an agreed upon number that they would give him in the beginning of the year that counts against the salary cap, and it would be a certain number of money, let's say $250,000. So if he scored 15 touchdowns over that expected number instead of 12, that would be categorized as not as likely, which would earn him a higher bonus at the end of the year and would be counted against that salary cap. Henry right now has 14, so you can see when we get to the end of the year, these contract milestones are very important and can play a part in depicting what to expect in weeks 16 and 17 and 18. So here are the 7 players that are super close to their season milestones that could propel them into a massive week 17 fantasy football day to help us win our fantasy football championship. If you do appreciate this video, nobody else is doing it like this, hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. It's free and takes 2 seconds, but we're going to be starting with Mike Evans and the Buccaneers. Baker also has a part in this. In the beginning of the year, his milestones for incentives are 70 receptions, 1,000 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns. A popular narrative around the NFL space is Mike Evans going for his 11th straight 1,000 yard season and making history, which is obviously something that he's going to be going for. But what people don't realize is that if he meets that 1,000 yard season mark, he gets an extra $1 million on top of his contract. Now, you may be asking, what number is he at right now? How many receiving yards does he have? He's at 818 despite missing a bunch of games this season, but that means he needs 182 more yards in the last 2 games of the year. That is very doable. If you even it out to the last 2 games, that's 91 receiving yards a game. Very possible in this stretch. He also needs 1 more touchdown to meet that 10 touchdown mark where he'd get another $1 million. And even crazier, on top of all of that, he has another bonus for his receptions. If he gets 70, that's another $1 million, meaning he needs 13 more in the next 2 games. That's 6.5 per game. That's very doable. Again, if you put all of these together in the last 2 weeks, he has the potential to earn $3 million if he gets 1 touchdown, 13 receptions, and 182 yards in the next 2 games. The reason this is so great is because quarterbacks want to get their guys paid. They want to get the best for their teammates and give them what they can. So a lot of the times we do see these quarterbacks go out of their way and throw the ball their way or just get them more involved in general to give them a free bonus at the end of the year and guaranteed money on top of their contract. And on top of that, Baker Mayfield has a ton of incentives that he's just shy of. He has 3,920 passing yards, 34 total touchdowns through his 15 games so far this year. Those are great numbers, probably all higher than we all expected, but what you didn't know is that those numbers are good for 6th in passing yards and 4th in touchdowns among all quarterbacks this year. Those are great numbers. What does this mean? Why are we talking about this for incentives? If he finishes inside the top 10 in both of those categories, he gets an extra $500,000 bonus at the end of the year. But he's also going to get another $500K added on if he finishes top 5 in both of those categories. So that's an extra $1 million just for the passing yards he's almost already at. Now, when we look at the standings right now, there's only a 176 yard difference between 6th place, which Baker is at, and 2nd place. That's more than doable. So when we look at the week 17 matchup, he gets one against the Panthers. You can assume, even if they start to blow this team out, they will continue to keep decent enough volume to keep all of these guys viable to secure top 5 in touchdowns and yardage. This game has a 48.5 point game total, which is on the higher side in the NFL for the week, and the Buccaneers are favored by 8 points. We will be firing up Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield both in this last week of the Fantasy Football Championship, but another guy with a huge contract is Courtland Sutton. He needs 1,065 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns to earn an extra $1 million on the year. When you look at what he's at right now, 100% is gonna happen. He's at 928 yards with 6 touchdowns on the year. That means 137 yards and 4 touchdowns over his next 2 games. That's average 68.5 and 2 touchdowns per game to get that extra $1 million. So we look at the touchdowns. Probably not going to happen. Averaging 2 touchdowns a game is not very likely, but when you look at the matchup, it's going to be good for these receiving yards. He gets the Bengals this week, which is one of the most positive matchups in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers and just yardage and points in general. The Bengals allow the 4th most points to opposing teams and also 4th in yardage allowed per game with 26.2 points and 359.9 yards. He will also be matched up against Cam Taylor-Britt this week, who is one of the best in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. He's averaging 0.36 fantasy points per route run to these guys. He's going to be on Courtland Sutton. That's top 5 in the NFL. Now, you might see some people talk about the weather concerns for this game. It's being played on Saturday at 4:30 Eastern time. The Bengals will be at home. It's not going to be an issue. The rain isn't projected to start till 9 or 10 p.m. way after the game is over, and even then it might still get pushed back and even be pushed to Sunday mostly. This game is at a 49.5 point game total, the highest of the week, and the Bengals are favored by 3 points, so we can expect this game is going to be close and a ton of scoring is going to happen. So that's going to be great for Sean Payton's offense and just giving Courtland Sutton the ball a lot and getting him those incentives. But looking into the running backs here, Tony Pollard is going to be a guy that is extremely close in his numbers and has a ton of these incentives to reach. The main one being his rushing yards at 1,107 rushing touchdowns and 60 receptions as well added on to that for a potential total bonus of $650K added onto his contract. So then let's look at the numbers he has right now. He's at 1,017 yards and 5 touchdowns on the year. We'll get to the receiving numbers in a minute, but when you look at these together, he needs 83 more yards and 2 touchdowns in his next 2 weeks to earn $200,000. That averages to 41.5 yards per game and 1 touchdown over his next 2 against the Jaguars and the Texans. Pollard is averaging 67.8 yards per game on the ground already, so that's a lock on its own. 2 touchdowns is also going to be doable, probably not insanely likely though, but more than possible to happen. His reception numbers though is what gets interesting because he has 47 on the year, which means he needs 13 more in 2 weeks to lock in that bonus, which is 6.5 per game. Huge ask if we're being completely honest out of running backs. It is in his realm of possibilities. As long as that number is somewhat in reach, they're definitely going to go for it and shoot for that high number, and it's going to give him a great floor in fantasy leagues, especially when you do consider that his matchup against the Jaguars is very, very positive. They're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs this year, very positive in the receiving game out of the backfield to running backs as well. And it does help a lot that Mason Rudolph is starting for this offense ever since he elevates this entire team in fantasy points scored, so that's going to be great. The only actual issue here is Tony Pollard's health. He has been off the injury report for so long now, but every single week he comes in, he's injured, then he ends up playing. It's probably because he wants to reach all of his incentives and he's so close to it. His snap share has been taking a hit because of it, which is terrible. It's something you could actually worry about in fantasy football, and he is questionable again coming into this week, so beware of his status. If he's not going to play or if he's going to be limited, like actually reported, it's going to be a little bit of a risky start. But if he is completely ruled out, Tyjae Spears is going to be an amazing replacement, a 1-to-1, 100%. I will be starting him in all of my leagues. The Jaguars matchup is too good to pass up, and this game is projected to be close, so it should be a positive spot for all of these running backs to get a good amount of usage. Again, that receiving number probably won't happen, but it's going to be close. They're going to shoot for it, and he's really close in the rushing yards. He's going to get his incentives almost guaranteed. Another running back, though, we need to exploit that is bound to destroy all of his projections is going to be Saquon Barkley. Yes, despite having an amazing season so far this year, there is still more milestones that he can reach. The popular narrative here is the all-time season rushing record set by Eric Dickerson in 1984 with 2,105 yards. If you look at Saquon, he's at 1,838. That means he's only 267 rushing yards away from that total. That averages to 133.5 yards per game. So that sounds insane. Like, we're going to be completely honest here. It sounds unattainable, but he's had 6 games this year over 145 rush yards. We know it can happen. He's also averaging 122.5 rush yards per game, so it's not too out of the reach. Like, for every other running back in the league, it's way out of reach, but for him, it's still possible, especially when you look at the matchups. He gets the Cowboys this week and the Giants in week 18, 2 matchups that are very, very positive in points allowed to the running back position. You know, everybody on this team wants to get him that record as far as rushing yards. It's not an incentive, but everybody wants it to happen on the Eagles. It is very likely that he does get there, or at least starts to be close. Now, if he gets 2,000 receiving yards on its own without beating the record, he gets an extra $250,000 bonus. That's only 162 yards away from what he has right now. That's 81 yards per game. Very, very possible and pretty much a guarantee to happen. Now, this Cowboys matchup, they are favored by 6.5 points, even with Hurts considered to be out missing this matchup. The game total is at 39.5 points, likely because he's not going to be in there, and CeeDee Lamb is also out for the year now as well. So there will be enough rushing attempts for Saquon Barkley with Kenny Pickett likely under center. We don't have to worry about the volume here. It's going to happen. But another fun thing to note here, not necessarily fantasy football wise, he also gets an extra $500,000 if he rushes for over 1,000 yards, which he has done, but also the Eagles do win in the NFC Championship, so do what you want with that information. But Zach Ertz is also making the cut for this video, and probably the best deal on this list because 66% of his contract is solely incentives. Like, absolutely crazy. He has incentives in every single aspect. Like, it doesn't have a cap either. If we look at his numbers right now, he's sitting at 55 receptions, 538 receiving yards with 4 touchdowns. So let's look at the ladder that is his incentive list. Keeping in mind his active totals right now, he gets $250K for 60 receptions, another $250 for 70, and another $250 for 80, $250 again if he gets to 6 touchdowns, another $250 if he gets to 8 touchdowns, all to be completed within the next 2 weeks. So if we take all those numbers and average it for the next 2 weeks, he needs 2.5 receptions per game for $250K, 7.5 receptions per game for $500K, and 12.5 for $750K. So if we do the same for his touchdowns here in that 2-week stretch, he needs 1 touchdown per game for another $250. So with how the Commanders have looked and have been playing this year, it's a 100% doable thing that he can at least get to 60, possibly even 70. They're 10th in passing touchdowns this year and one of the most efficient in the league. Now, coming into a very positive matchup against the Falcons this week, the Cowboys in week 18, they're both must-win games for the Commanders and very positive in yardage allowed to wide receivers, tight ends, in pretty much every single position. Jayden Daniels and this team will be gunning for points, wins, and yards. The only issue with Zach Ertz is that he hasn't played a full complete game since week 12. He's completely off the injury report for this week 17 matchup though, so he will be at a full snap count. It's not anything we have to worry about. And the Commanders are favored by 4 points against the Falcons with a 47.5 point game total. Zach Ertz is going to get his incentives. At the very least, he's going to get 5 receptions a game. But speaking of tight ends, Brock Bowers is a guy that doesn't have any incentives at all, but does still make this list because of how good his rookie year has been. There are some records that are in reach for him to beat, and you know he's going to want to get those. The first being the rookie receiving record for receptions set by Puka Nacua with 105 last year, but also the rookie tight end receiving yard record set by Mike Ditka in 1961 with 1,076 yards. So when you look at his totals that he's at right now, he's as close as you can get to a guarantee for beating both of these records here. He's 9 yards behind the receiving yard record. That's 5 yards a game. That's locked in. And he is also at 101 receptions, needing 5 more to beat Puka's record, 2.5 per game. Another thing that's going to be easy for him to beat. And you might say, okay, well, he's pretty close to all these records. Why are we kind of putting him in this video? He's going to get it, call it a day. The answer is, if you're in the NFL and you're this close to beating the records with 2 more games left, you're going to play your heart out and play as good as you possibly can to make sure nobody ever comes close and touches your records again. And we do look at his matchups in these back-to-back weeks here. He gets the Saints. We all know how positive that is. And then the Chargers in week 18. It's going to be a tough matchup, but one where they're going to have to pass. The Saints matchup this week is a 37.5 point game total. It is on the lower side, but it's not much different than what the Raiders have been averaging for the entire season. And they are favored by 1 point, so you can expect the game's going to be close. There's going to be a good amount of passing volume going the way of Brock Bowers. But the quarterback that we need to be starting in 100% of our leagues, I needed to add it in this video right now before Saturday starts because he does play on Saturday. It is Joe Burrow against the Denver Broncos. Now, a lot of people aren't really going to be instant starting him because of, one, the weather concern that people have, and then also the matchup against the Denver Broncos. They allow the 5th least points to opposing quarterbacks this year, but that is not going to phase Joe Burrow. He's the QB3 on the year in fantasy so far, and all of his weapons are healthy. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Mike Gesicki, I guess if you want to call it that, Andre Yoshivas, they're all going to be playing. This is a very important game for the Broncos for playoff implications. Joe Burrow is going to be passing a lot. Jamar Chase also has a triple crown season on the edge of happening. He's already beat the touchdowns. The yards and receptions are very, very close. Again, our quarterbacks want to get their wide receiver success and bonuses and into these numbers, but this game has one of the highest projected team totals of the week. It's going to be an offensive shootout. And the thing with the Bengals defense is that they are absolutely terrible. They cannot stop anybody. They're averaging 26.2 points a game to opposing offenses, 30 points a game allowed over the last 2 months. Cam Taylor-Britt, none of them. They can't stop anybody, and we also do have Courtland Sutton going for these yard receptions and touchdown incentives. It's going to be an offensive game that is everywhere. As far as the weather goes, it's not really a concern. Earlier in the week it was. Now coming into tonight and tomorrow, it doesn't look like it will be. The rain will start at 9 or 10 p.m. and it's been getting pushed back all week. A lot of people are concerned with that. Maybe a little bit of a mist at most. I'm not concerned for the receiving game as far as that goes, though. Make sure you do stay up to date on that if you do have a worry with it. Joe Burrow is my top 3 quarterback this week. You need to be starting him. That is going to finish off this video, though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in tomorrow's video. Be subscribed for that of the must-start players. I needed to add Joe Burrow in this one to make sure you get the information. All glory to the man above.